Greetings and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Welcome to episode 144.
Oh, we made it.
Yes.
Happy November.
Happy November. Yeah, it's dropping on November the 1st today.
There you go.
That's what this
It's
episode
November
is.
the 1st
It
right
is.
now.
It is. So welcome to the podcast. My name is Jason. This is Ed. This is Nathan, teaching team at Community Christian and that we are a part of. And we come together every week and answer some of your questions, talk about how to live like and think like Jesus in our world. Got another great question, as I teased last week. We are still at the same place where we were last week, distracted with the Braves game.
Now, by November 1st, how long is a
Well, I was
MLB
just thinking-
playoff?
They could be out by now.
I think the World Series might be either over or happening for sure.
Wow.
It's happening for
How
sure.
long is it? How many you got to win?
Well, this one that
This is
we're
the
watching
best of
right is
five.
the first game of 5. You got to win 3
Gotta
in
win
this
3
one.
that is exactly what the NBA playoffs should be.
Well,
Best out of 7.
now
Whoa.
the next
one
round
is
a
7.
7.
Well, I think that's fine as you go on, but the
Yeah.
first round, you
Well,
don't
the first
need 7
round
games.
this time in baseball was best out of 3.
2 out of 3.
Oh,
Then this is the 3 out of 5.
Because
that's a good playoff.
for the
system right
sake
there.
of competition, read money. For the sake of competition, we put more people in the playoffs.
Well, that's not good.
We
but
played 7 months.
How many
The
teams?
NBA puts everybody in the playoffs.
No,
Basically.
not everybody, but a lot of them.
We get
a lot of them.
about half the team.
Half of them get
Well,
it.
in our division, 3/4 of the teams made the playoffs.
That's true.
In our particular division, 3 of the 4 teams were in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So we played a 7-month season to eliminate the team in Florida.
Yes.
Well, good.
All right.
Which should always be the goal of every playoff is whatever team is in Florida should just be eliminated.
Yep. Uh-oh.
They
They just took our pitcher out.
took Max out.
That's not good.
No.
So,
But we have a
wouldn't it be
question.
great, though, if there was like a big comeback? And
Well,
we
that's
were
what I'm
watching
thinking.
it
We
live?
may have watched all of these eventually. Well, I'm going to control myself. I
You are?
determined that when I brought this in here, that no matter what good or bad happens on there, I promise to stuff that down until Charlie says so.
Okay.
Okay. That's
Well,
good.
hopefully you'll do that. All right.
By the
So,
way, we got rid of the throne, but Charlie's sitting on the throne. Which
Man,
we
he is.
He
put
stole
it,
my
we
throne.
put it over there. He didn't steal it. I moved it over there. But Charlie is now on the throne, which is right because he's
He
in
is.
charge.
he
For it.
is.
That's
Because we
right.
want to treat Charlie good so he doesn't,
He doesn't leave
screw
like the
anything
other
up.
producers. would
Yeah.
That's
have.
right.
All right. So today's question is based on a message that Nathan preached
That's just what
several
you
weeks
said.
ago. And so somebody, in fact, this question came in like the day after your message. So this was
Hot off the press.
They are angry.
They were no, they weren't
No.
angry.
Oh, they're not
This
angry.
is not an angry
Oh,
question. This is a
well, here we
really
go.
good question and very complimentary of your message. They just
Oh,
want some
Well, then let's read this twice.
next. They just want some next steps on this kind of thing.
Okay. Well, here
So,
we go.
Here's the question, Nathan. I love Nathan's message on racism. Good job.
No, very
I
sweet.
also thought. it was
I did too.
Very sweet.
All right. So they say I'm white, and as a child, my dad was racist. I am so ashamed to admit that I sometimes still hear his rhetoric in my head, and it's sometimes pretty awful. Do you have any advice for how I can break the cycle of hearing these ingrained remarks? Also, I believe that we shouldn't pretend to be colorblind, and we should normalize talking about all of our differences, racism included. So what do you guys think? I agree with that last part, if you're asking what I think about that last
everything
part.
you said. I agree.
So yeah, the main question they want to know is, I've got this racism in my past within my family. How do I break the cycle of just, their comment was, I hear these remarks over and over and over again. How do I break that cycle?
Jason, I feel like you would have some good advice at least on because there's two different real parts of that. I mean, part of it is the racial aspect, but part of what they're asking is, I have unwanted thoughts.
Yep.
I don't want these thoughts.
Yep.
They're in my head,
Yep.
which I think everyone experiences, whether it's racial or not. We all have unwanted thoughts.
Yep.
Some of that is just temptation from the enemy. We talked about that. The world, the flesh, and the devil. Part of it, though, is my flesh.
Sure.
Part of it is I have thought patterns. I just have things. Jason currently is in school for counseling, for psychology. So I don't want to put you boldly on the spot as I just have, but I figure you have some experience and maybe even some new knowledge on how to help people just deal with unwanted thoughts in general.
In that way, I hadn't planned on. Yeah, that's a great point you make there. I hadn't planned on talking about this, but you're right. There is and I always tell people this when we talk about this issue. I said there is a unique ability that human beings have that no other living thing on this earth has, and that ability is that we have the ability to think about our thinking.
Right.
We
That's
can
good.
think about our thoughts. We can hold them in an objective light and change them. Actually,
Right.
They aren't just instinctual. Now, to be fair, like you just said, there are, I guess you call them instinctual, but thoughts that just pop into your head.
Like ingrained, like grooves of things.
Yeah, that you have no control.
And I'm not really, I'm not responsible.
You don't have
for
any
it. They
control
come into
over
my
that.
mind.
You can have. Let's just be real for a second. You can have some pretty depraved
Mm-hmm.
thoughts.
Absolutely.
You can have some lustful thoughts that you didn't want in there that if anyone ever saw, they might lock you up for.
That's right.
Hateful, angry.
Hate-filled thoughts. And yes, even racist thoughts
That's
that
right.
pop into your head,
Absolutely.
just like you just said. The key is, and I believe this is clearly a biblical principle, is to take what the Bible says, every thought captive. And I think what he means in that is what we talk about when we say, take the thought, analyze it, run it through the filters of truth, and run it through the filters of what Paul said we ought to always be thinking about, things that are right, noble, pure, praiseworthy, and true. And once you've tested that thought, then you get to decide, am I going to keep this? Am I going to allow it to influence me? Am I going to obey it?
Yeah.
Or am I going to throw it away? And just because you have the thought, and I guess probably what I hear inside the question is the fact that I'm having these thoughts that come back from my past a problem or something that indicates that I am somehow closet racist somehow.
Right.
And I would say I don't necessarily think so.
No, just having the thoughts.
Just having the thoughts, no. But what you do with them and how they influence you, that is the main issue. And so, like I said, you hold the thought out. I always teach people, act like the thought is something you can actually put in your hand. And if you if it helps you, hold it out in front of you and say, now, what is this thought? Here's what it says. And do I believe that? Is that true? Is that right? Is that loving? And if it's not, and if it is not of God, I toss it away and move on.
Yeah, if it's not going to help me love God and love people,
Sure.
It is obviously not a thought I should hold on to. I can't help that it came into my head, but I can decide. The thought of holding it captive to me is the one when somebody's captive, they don't have freedom. So I take the thoughts in my mind and I don't give them freedom just to roam freely in my spirit, my will, those things. I hold them captive until I decide.
Yeah.
And don't you also think, to more specific to the topic, if you want to change your thinking over time, because like Nathan alluded to, if you do this long enough, you are able to reroute the flow of your brain,
Right.
The thinking that you have. If you are struggling with some residual racist thinking that's from your past, you continue to do this, and you can change the trajectory of your thinking. Also, I think and you may already be doing this, but if you're not, I think it would behoove you to get around some people who are different from you, and to experience them in a place where you can learn some empathy for who they are, for what their experience might be. Have conversations if you're not already. And this is more than just, I've got a couple of black friends. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about doing life with some people that you have maybe some untested, preconceived thoughts about who they are and what their experience is. My guess is you'll probably change your mind real fast.
And to go into that, 2 years ago when George Floyd was killed, I began a really conscious journey to try to do something to learn what was the truth about race in our country. And particularly, I wanted to ask the believers in our church who were black and brown if they'd be willing just to tell me their experiences. The toughest part for me was to receive it without question,
Yes.
Mhm.
to listen unconditionally, not to say, well, this.
Yeah.
You have to understand that
Mm-hmm.
the toughest part is to say they experienced this, that's real.
That's
Right.
right.
What they experienced is real. It may not be the whole story. They weren't telling me it's the whole story,
Doesn't
but
matter.
the experience is real, and it created empathy in me.
Mm-hmm.
I told, and this is a different subject, but for me, one of the biggest prejudices I had when I was in my early 20s, my dad was not a racial racist, but he was prejudiced toward people who were poor.
Mhm.
Mm.
If you were poor in this country, he thought you deserved it.
Mhm.
That anybody in this country that didn't want to be poor had all the capability to not be poor. And I came into ministry with that thought, and I would hear those thoughts in my mind. If you don't want to be poor, don't be poor.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Decide to do something else. And a very good Christian man who wasn't even a part of my church, but that I had been around in a civic club, listened to me for a while and basically said, hey, how many poor people you spend much time around?
Mhm.
And I said, well, not very much. He said, well, why don't you and I work together on starting something in our county to work for poor people?
Mhm.
And we'll just do it side by side and we'll see what. And I'll tell you, this almost 6 years that I worked with him on that, committing 2 days a week, that I would be with poor people and I would try to figure out their life and how I would actually live their life if I were in their place. I realized it was way more complicated than I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it sounds like for the person who's asking that you are acknowledging this kind of problem in your past, at least of your upbringing and the things that your dad said or his outlook was certainly wrong. And I hope you would even use the term sinful, not as a way to call to judge your parents. I think it's really important that in conversations of race we don't get too bogged down into conversations about a person is racist or a person is evil, although obviously the act of racism is sinful and it is evil. But the problem with doing so is it allows me to decenter myself in the thing and to say that there are people who are racist. And I wouldn't be racist because racism is bad and I'm not bad.
Right.
And that racism is a bigger part of the systems, as we already said on Sunday in the message. It's part of our world. It's part of the systems of our world. It's also part of our flesh, so it gets into us. But it is a scheme of the evil one. And so I think being able to be able to identify those things that were said, that was racist, it was evil, it was wrong, and then to be able to treat it such, which means it becomes a thing of prayer for you. And I think all the stuff Jason said is something I'm learning in my life. I've been learning about the past 5 or 6 years of learning how to kind of be more mindful in my brain of what are the thoughts coming in. I was always very good at putting a filter on. I shouldn't say I was good. I've always learned how to put a filter on my mouth. The problem is when you put the filter on your mouth and not your mind, stuff eventually starts leaking out.
Yep.
And all of us have that. But if I can put a filter on my mind and start to catch any kind of unwanted, bitter, negative, we talked in the last episode about love and, these unforgiving thoughts that come in my head, when I can catch them and not even go down that road. And what I'm learning, and I heard a priest actually talk about this, and he talked about using every moment, and he was talking about lust. He said, use lust as an opportunity to pray. He said, everything's an opportunity. So when I start to lust, start to pray about it. So what I would encourage you is when those thoughts come in your head, it could be, as we've already said, it could be a groove that your mind's just on. And so if you just change your thinking, it'll go away. But even if you do that, those thoughts may come in because they may be from the evil one. It may be the evil one bringing these thoughts into your mind to try and distract you. And always use that as an opportunity to go, wow, that's a hateful thought. It didn't necessarily come from me, but I'm going to pray about it and say, God, lead me into love. Lead me to do this. And I think the more that we can do that, the other thing I would just encourage everybody, I wanted to include it in the sermon Sunday, but I think especially and you said you're white, for white believers, it is so important that we truly decenter ourselves in this conversation. What I mean is, in our world, this idea of kind of waking up to the racial injustice in our world becomes a self-improvement plan for white people.
Mhm.
It becomes a way for me to be a little more culturally educated than I was before. And, I'm going to get some friends of color and I'll learn a little bit about their culture and their heritage and their stories. And I have all these things, and it'll just be a part of me becoming less racist or me becoming more whatever. But the goal should always be that the kingdom of God comes. The goal for believers is that justice is done and that there's unity in the church and that the oppressed are lifted up and that these kind of things are our goal. And the truth is, the racism that is in my flesh keeps that from happening. So yes, I have to deal. And that is the reason that we've said all the stuff we do. Listen to stories of people, gain friendships of people who have different experiences, deal with your thoughts. But the goal is not, once you've done that, well, now I just don't have these thoughts in my head anymore. And now I don't, and I'm not saying that's your goal, but I know that I think it is almost everyone's goal at first. I'll just say, I think it is a natural, I feel really guilty about the thoughts that are in my head and the feelings that are in my head, but that can't be the end goal. The end goal has to be, I want to see justice done. I want to see unity in the church that looks like the kingdom of God. And that when that becomes your goal, then you find out that eventually I get to a place, and as you put at the end, it's not that I'm colorblind. It's not that the race doesn't matter. It's that suddenly I'm appreciating all the beauty that comes into the kingdom from all these different perspectives and all these different cultures and all of this that kind of gets brought in together. It allows me to actually appreciate that and to be a part of it. But I just think that's important. I think so often, and unfortunately to the several friends have told me how exhausting it is to just have to hear the confessions of white people who want to just say, well, let me confess racism that I've had towards other people that aren't even you, but you're a person of color and I need to say it to you. It becomes this very, let me get this guilt off of me instead of a higher goal. And I'm not saying at all, by the way, that I did not hear that in your question.
No, not at all.
But I do think that is an important part. That is a part of us, white believers, in our work in this. Part of the privilege that we have is the ability to walk away from the conversation and to really kind of make it about us. And we have to lay that down because this is not about us.
Yeah. I think it's so important for all the things you just said, and particularly the part about eventually we want to see justice done. We want to see the kingdom come. And that's what we're praying for, that God's kingdom to come. And if we all admit at some point, and we don't all because it's not true for all, that in our past we know we had relatives that were racist.
Yeah,
and
sure.
in the past we know that our culture was racist.
Mm-hmm.
Then what we are saying is there's a very good chance that there's been injustice that has been done and got deeply ingrained in our systems.
Mm-hmm.
That eventually I have to go beyond just understanding. I become an ally.
Yeah.
I become someone that begins to work for, because I want the kingdom of God to come. And even in places where it's not the church, but the church should have influence. Everybody's wanting influence and everything else. I mean, why shouldn't we? And the way we do that is we become the example. We root it all out in the church.
Mm-hmm.
I came from a similar background as the person who asked the question. And as I was listening, as I was first reading it, I was thinking, what took me so long to really admit and to come and to be honest about is that it wasn't just comments that I heard when I was growing up and they, stuck in my head, although they did. And it wasn't just, I had a family member, but, I grew up different and now I'm different. Although I feel like that there's a truth in that. I did not know until recently how much I was swimming in racism, and how it was like being in a pool of water. And even when I got out of it, I was wet.
Yeah.
And it had nothing to do with me actively going out and trying to oppress anyone or to say those words or to use those names that I heard growing up. I didn't do those things, but I was still again, I had it in me, I had it on me, and I didn't know, and I didn't know how that felt to the people that I was around, and I've started to come to grips with some of that. Not that, like you said, Nathan, not that I need to go and make some big confession, but now I need to say, okay, here's what that is, and here's what we need to do about it.
Right.
And not necessarily involving anybody else. That's not on them.
In my
to do.
areas
It's
of
on me.
influence, I try to do what I can to bring about justice.
Exactly. And acknowledge what I swam in.
That's right. Acknowledge.
That's for me. That's the way it feels these days for me. So.
Well, and I think in particular, when you read, I heard, I don't remember who it was I heard say this, but they use the term, the word xenophobia gets thrown around a lot lately in the last 4 to 5 years in our country, of this idea of the fear of the other, phobia being fear, xeno being other. But that they talk about what was so strange about Christianity when it came was that it was a xenophilia community, that philia meaning love. It was the love of the other, that there was something about Jesus that it wasn't just, hey, and this is how I think many of us approach and I don't just mean race, I mean people who have disabilities, people, you mentioned other people of different socioeconomic classes than me, often men and women, right? Gender kind
different ages.
Yeah, different ages, different generations. There seems to be a way that what most of our approach tends to be is, I'm cool with all people, and if you're cool with me, I'm cool with you, and I'll accept you if you come to me. But what is different about Jesus is this idea of seeking out, intentionally trying to find someone who is different than me, and possibly who maybe has been disadvantaged where I have been advantaged, and to try and to say, hey, how can we love one another on equal ground, where I can actually lean on you and you can lean on me, that it's not this I'm handing out to you. And so that applies to race, but it applies to all different kinds of things. And I think the thing that I would just encourage anyone who feels convicted, I had a couple people talk to me on Sunday about feeling convicted. And when I really started to feel convicted about this years ago, my first step and kind of hearing this idea of xenophilia was I would intentionally move towards people who were different than me. And I would to a point that I would even get teased about it to my closest friends. I would just be teased about Nathan's always just go. If they are different than Nathan, he is moving towards them. And it became a part of, I just wanted to make sure that in my heart, there is something that happens. I learned something better about even how to love people who are like me when I learned to move towards people who are different than me, because what it forces me to do, and this is, I think, what's uncomfortable, and I mean with anything, if you're a young person and you have to talk to someone in their 70s, or I'm sure it's the same way, if you're in your 70s, you talk to someone, there's this uncomfortable, like, I'm not sure what I can say, and I don't know what might be offensive to them, and I don't know. And so what you find yourself doing is you start thinking through everything going, well, how are they going to receive this? How are they going to feel about this? What would make them feel most comfortable when that's my goal? And the truth is, I should be taking that home with my wife and sitting with my wife and thinking, what would make her feel most comfortable? How's she going to receive what I'm about to say?
Because what you're doing is loving.
Yeah,
That's a loving thought process.
That's right.
And so I would just encourage you that, and I would start in the church. So you said you're white. So when you're at church on Sunday, when you see someone who is not white and you don't know them, would you just go over and introduce yourself? And you may feel the thing that I did when I first started doing this. If they go, oh, they're coming over looking for a black friend or a Hispanic friend or what, I'll just tell you that has not even been the response I've ever gotten. And that over and over again, everyone loves to feel welcomed. Everyone, when your genuine goal is not, I'm trying to collect a person, but your genuine goal is, I want to love a person and I want to know you, everyone receives that. And I think if that would be your goal, if of rooting this out is, I want to seek out people who are different. And in my church, a community Christian, I want them to feel welcomed and sought after. I want them to feel like I was expecting them and that I want them here and that they're desired. It would change your experience, but it would change their experience too. And it would make our church look more like the kingdom. So that would be my advice to you as far as an action beyond, your internal stuff.
Yeah, that's really good.
Well said. We will end on that note. All right. So we're gonna record one more in this session, which means I know what next week is about.
Okay.
So
Right.
come back next week.
Jason
and
knows the future,
I
y'all.
know the future.
Oh, let's go.
And
And the Braves are now losing by 5.
yes, they are. And we'll-
It's getting worse as longer we
getting bad.
record.
yeah.
What inning?
So it's the 4th inning.
It's not too
That's all right.
far.
So we got time.
Not
We got
too
time.
far.
So maybe during the next podcast, the Braves will be on. Comeback.
Massive rally.
We'll see.
Yeah, maybe.
Jason's
So,
going to come in here with a rally cap for the next episode.
Ooh, wouldn't that be fun? Huh?
Man.
Well, there goes that one. Almost. So anyway, back to the point. Next week we've got a question about marriage, and the question is about a chapter in the Bible that seems to infer that people ought not to be married.
Mm.
There is a chapter that just outright says that.
Well,
Those words are written in.
Then we're gonna talk
There's
about
not
that.
an inference. There's
Yeah.
a statement.
So we're going to talk about is that really what it's trying to say, and give some advice on that. So, person's very confused about this chapter. So,
Yeah.
Well, it feels confusing in our culture. so
Well,
I'm
I
excited
think
to talk about
particularly
it.
in Christian culture.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that. Why?
Save it for
Yeah,
next-
okay.
save it for next week.
There we go.
We'll come back. We'll talk about that chapter, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.